Much for sticking around and joining us for our post-concert chat. We don't get to chat to our musicians often enough after concerts. They probably want to go and do things like have a long hard lie down or a beverage or something, but we're so glad we get to have a chat to you. So thank you for being part of our discussion today, and thank you to you guys for joining us as well. My name's Morwenna, and I'm going to be our MC for our panel conversation this afternoon. As you can see, we've got some captioning happening today. We've put, Lamorna and the team have put a lot of effort into making today's performance accessible. 1 in 6 Australians have hearing loss. That includes probably 1 in 6 of us in this room. So things like captions are really great to incorporate into all sorts of live performance. Before we begin, of course, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on Gadigal land this afternoon, part of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Gadigal land is where I have the pleasure to live, work and mostly play as well, so it's a real privilege to be here, and where we have people who have joined us from other places and parts of Australia today as well. Firstly, thank you guys. That was amazing. What a beautiful, beautiful way to spend an afternoon. I think I'm just kind of feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the talent that we've just experienced and the beautiful curation of putting everything together. It felt just right and kind of perfect, actually. So to be in the presence of these incredible disabled women is quite a powerful and amazing thing, and unfortunately a little bit of a rarity in Australia. We don't have so many concerts like this really celebrating the talents of our deaf and disabled artists in Australia. So hats off to Backstage and Lamorna for having the vision to put this together and making it a reality this afternoon. Thank you to Lamorna and Georgia for making this all happen today. So, look, I know there's a program that some of you might have perused, but I do want to take some time to introduce you a little bit more fulsomely to the incredible people we have with us today, because they're all really brilliant and have done lots of brilliant things, and you kind of need to know about some of those. So sorry, guys, but I am going to introduce you briefly. Georgia Scott, to my left. Georgia is someone whose music has focused on identity and lived experience, and she uses music to explore topics that may be divisive or difficult to approach using language. She has a history studying at the Royal College of Music in London, at the Sydney Conservatorium as well, and has premiered in a whole heap of venues such as the National Portrait Gallery in London, Dulwich Picture Gallery, St Martin in the Fields, Sydney Opera House. And she has worked with a seriously impressive list of ensembles such as the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, Janacek Philharmonic, Murrumbidgee Voices, Gondwana Junior, Australian World Orchestra. I could go on. There are so many. So, Georgia, so great to have you with us. Beautiful Ria to Georgia's left. Ria is a Braille specialist by day and a musician and writer by nights and on weekends, but also recently newish employee of ABC as well. So don't let the music slip too far away though. Hold on to that as much as you can. Ria graduated with a Bachelor of Music and Arts from UNSW. She sings as a soprano with various choirs and ensembles in Sydney. She also writes around issues of accessibility in the arts, choral music, and as a reviewer as well. Nat, a twice ARIA-nominated Australian pianist and composer who creates, as you heard this afternoon, lyrical, ethereal work that explores the space between neoclassical, chamber music and jazz. She has released 7 recordings, it's not too shabby, of original music, toured domestically and internationally, coming to Sydney, 19th of January, don't forget, everyone. Really becoming very well known for these beautiful lullabies, and the lullaby album Forever and No Time at All was released in 2018 on ABC Classics. It's been played regularly by many families, including mine, so it's very nice to meet Nat today. Kristin. I love this about Kristin, a bicycle-riding, nature-loving cellist, composer and technologist based in the remote Victorian town of Mallacoota. Studied at the VCA, and has had a really unique pathway into the music industry with cello, viola, live looping and moving images. As you probably got an inkling of with the performance, has a background very much as a film composer with some really great things that she's written the music for, a lot with The Beach, and what was the name of that? The Warren...
We Don't Need a Map.
Yes,
Yeah,
I saw that at Sydney Film Festival a few years ago. So great. Yeah. And so really looking forward to talking to Kristin about her journey with sort of moving from cello to viola. And Rebecca as well. And Rebecca is a composer and sound artist living in Naarm in Melbourne. Originally trained as a classical accordionist and began a degree in composition at Monash in 2018 and has done an honours thesis on the creative implications of listening with hearing loss. And Rebecca is going to, we're going to kick off, in fact, with hearing from Rebecca first of all, because as part of our commitment to accessibility, we wanted to give all of our panellists the opportunity to contribute to this conversation in a way that was accessible and suitable for them. And Rebecca has chosen to have a chat with us this afternoon by video. So if we can play Rebecca's video, I think we might start there. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing that with us. Obviously, we're in the presence of people who are not just amazing musicians, but also venturing into other art forms and film and visuals as well. So, one of the many reasons I was really pleased to have Rebecca as part of this concert is that we get to have a musician who is in the deaf, hard of hearing camp. Sometimes there can be so many assumptions that we make about people from the deaf community or hard of hearing community not being interested in music, and this is something that we're really starting to see shift and change. In fact, it was International Day for People with Disability yesterday, and the Opera House did a big plug about some work that they're doing with the deaf community at the moment, using sub-packs which for deaf audience members so they can feel vibration of concerts coming through as another way to experience music. So thank you, Rebecca. And now to you guys. So, Georgia, I thought we might start with you. Georgia is someone who's worn many hats in bringing today's concert together, not least of which is composing some awesome music, but also being involved in many of the logistics for making this happen. Excellent, thank you. So Georgia, I have a question around, I know Morwenna has been the incredible driving force behind this concert, but can you talk us through some of the logistics around making a concert like today happen, and how many of the different things that you had to think about to bring us here?
Well, I think for me, I think I came in a little bit later. So I think you and Morwenna had been having some conversations around possible people to involve in the concert, and I kind of came on board to be able to reach out to people and to kind of start that dialogue with artists. And so it was quite nerve-wracking to me. I'd never done anything like this before. I'd never curated anything before, and especially something like this, which is so close to my heart, but obviously I had no experience, so that was quite daunting. And so for me, I was quite nervous about, as Morwenna was saying before, about language and the right way to reach out to people, because it's such an assumption to make about how people will identify and feel comfortable identifying. And so to ask artists to be part of a concert that are celebrating artists, like disabled artists, is quite an assumption to make. So I was very grateful that everyone was so gracious, and it was wonderful to kind of be able to keep those channels open. So that was one of the first kind of things to really think about, even before kind of moving into putting on the concert in terms of logistics, just reaching out to everyone in the first place, and ensuring that it was a space where everyone was able to express exactly what they wanted to express through their music, and we weren't prescribing anything. And as you said before, similarly with the panel, everyone was able to contribute in a way that was kind of felt right to them.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because with disability, obviously, not all disability is visible. Not all of us choose to identify or disclose information about that part of our identity in different settings. So finding disabled musicians can sometimes be a challenge, because it's not always apparent. It's not always something that in the music industry people want to talk about, because there is certain assumptions and stigma that musicians with disability can still face. Now, I want to get you guys as an audience starting to think of some questions. I'll do a bit of chatting with these guys first, but then we want to make sure that we give you an opportunity to talk to them as well. So start putting your thinking caps on. But I thought I would love to hear from each of you about a little bit about your creative practice and how, if at all, disability impacts or plays into that. Is your lived experience of disability something that comes through or has influenced your relationship to music? And also, why did you say yes to today? What is it that's appealing about being in a concert like this? And Nat, you're looking thoughtful, so I'm going to start with you.
I think like I was saying before in my segment of the concert, it's quite a new thing for me to know that I'm autistic, and that sounds like it's a very common experience for women in particular, where they go through their childhood and early, years of adulthood, kind of never really feeling like they fit in anywhere, and possibly having some other traits that they need to manage to do with stimming or organising things, or paying attention, or focusing too much on something, or problems with social communication or relationships. And so for me, I've been making music and identified as a musician for a lot longer than I've identified as an autistic musician. But looking back, I think I really do see my disability as sort of kind of the reason why I am a professional musician and I make the type of music I do. Music is my autistic special interest, and I would happily do it 19 hours a day if I was allowed to, but I'm not, and I've learnt that that's also unsustainable. And becoming a mother was a really good way of putting the brakes on, because you've got to do the childcare pickup and stop doing what you're doing. And the other way I think it plays into it is that I sort of carry around a very deep sense of empathy for other people's experiences, and things can be sort of deeply affecting, and as well as having my own big feelings that need regulation. So I think the music I make, and that's very kind of meditative quality, and the way that I often write about things like the bushfires or climate change or the experiences of oppressed, groups like women and stuff like that. I think all of that comes back to just having this really big autistic heart that needs to sort of emote and regulate my own emotions. And the benefit of that is it seems to regulate other people's emotions too, which is a really special gift for the music. So, yeah.
Thanks, Nat.
No worries.
Shall we come over to Kristin?
I had my 5th hand reconstruction last year, so I've had quite a number over about a 3-year period, and I haven't quite worked out where I'm going with it all. I just have a passion to make music, and when Georgia and Lamorna reached out to me, they were just very careful because I didn't know what my position was. I do mention that I've had a hand accident, but I don't, I haven't processed it myself fully yet. And I was just so humbled and honoured to be asked to be involved with such wonderful artists. It's really, really appreciated the opportunity to perform. And through the process of how things unfolded, it put this goalpost for me to keep striving for. So it's just, and at this stage of my recovery, those goalposts, they're kind of keeping me going. Without them, I wouldn't do it. So I have such deep appreciation that they were there, and that all of these people on stage, it's the most supportive situation I've been in since the accident. I just feel really well supported. They're all brilliant and talented, and it's, I feel good about today. Thank you all for coming along to listen, because that matters too, and obviously good sound and pro video. It means that I have hope, and I'll keep going.
Thanks, Kristin. Let's make sure we find you some more goalposter things.
I'm happy to have a break.
Yeah.
I worked pretty hard.
Thank you. Georgia, what about you? Tell us a little bit about your creative practice and where disability fits within all of that.
Yeah, I think having cerebral palsy and having my right side being weaker kind of meant that I really wanted to play piano, and I was really excited, but then I just never could get the kind of technical ability going that I wanted. And so on my right side, and I kind of was finding that very frustrating. And so that kind of, I think, took me into the road of being a composer, because I was like, well, how can I still be part of music and be within this, but not kind of just get frustrated at myself. So that was kind of how I got in to composition. And I think it's just really important. When Lamorna first approached me, I was just so excited that I was like, oh, this is kind of maybe the beginning of some change about who's going to be on stage and whose voices are going to be heard. And so that was really exciting to me. And I was like, I would absolutely love to be part of something like this. So yeah, I'm just so excited that it's happened.
And it is rare. So, let there be more of it. Ria, what about you?
Yes, so I identify as being blind, and historically there has been a long lineage of musicians who identify, like if you search musicians with disability, blindness comes up quite often. Of course, like the pathways of each of those people are they have to carve their own unique pathways, and the path that I've chosen is to become a choral singer with using Braille scores to communicate my singing. And part of the reason why I wanted to be part of this concert is, like, normally I perform with sighted musicians in a choral situation, but I thought, you know what, it would be really fun to also know what other people with disabilities are doing, and also other women with disability. As I said before, it is quite rare to have this kind of opportunity. So yeah, I grabbed it with both hands, and yeah, literally grabbed it with both hands.
Thanks, Ria. And thank you also for sharing a little bit about Braille music before, because I know there's would definitely be some musicians in the audience who would be really interested to kind of, see what that is like and understand what reading Braille music is about. So I don't know, I'm going to kind of go off script straight away and just ask you maybe to tell us a little bit more about that and how the reading process of Braille music works, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure thing. So Braille music is a code that was devised by Louis Braille, who was the Frenchman who invented the code of erased dots. He thought, well, let's just do some music. So there are some crazy things. It makes sense if you kind of like get into his mind, which I won't because it will take forever. But basically, the main difference is for most musicians reading scores, they read vertically. I read horizontally. So instead of A is higher than F, for instance, I kind of recognize them by shape. And so words in my case are different to that they're written in different lines to music. So I had to memorize either the words or the music. And it does, what I'm coming to realize lately is it does require quite a lot of dexterity to navigate the scores, which I'm still kind of getting to explore that side of the dexterity of it.
Thanks, Ria. Fascinating stuff, and just some of the adaptations that deaf and disabled people come up with in everyday life, and some of the workarounds and solutions that are out there are really fascinating. So great to understand a little more about Braille music. So we've got some incredible disabled talent with us today. As I said before, we've also put some effort into making today an accessible audience experience as well. And there's a whole bunch of different ways in which we can think about audience accessibility and including disabled people in our audience. And so, Georgia and Ria, I just wondered if you guys wanted to have a chat about that. Georgia, perhaps in terms of some of the things that have been done for today. And Ria has recently published an incredible article with the ABC about accessible classical music concerts happening in Australia, and some great examples. So maybe I'll get Georgia to go first and just talk to us about, some of the thinking and work that's gone on behind the scenes for today, and then Ria perhaps to chat about some of the things happening across Australia too.
Sure. So I think it was, as I said, a little bit overwhelming for me to kind of come in. Of course, I have a disability, but just coming in from this sort of perspective is a totally new thing for me. So it was really interesting to be able to think not just about the physical venue, but in terms of how to make a website accessible for those who use screen readers, and just like a lot of other things in terms of the social media posts, all of that sort of side of preparing for a concert, those sort of logistics. Also, just in terms of preparation for coming to the concert, having a way for people to know what to expect in terms of getting to the concert, in terms of what sort of music to expect. So those sort of things, it was really interesting for me to be able to explore. As well, there's been no pun intended, a bit of a shift of venues. So we were originally supposed to be in the Centre for Creativity at the Opera House, and it was really interesting as part of that working with Janelle Ryan, who is the Accessibility Operations Manager at the Opera House, and she, along with Morwenna, really helped me to kind of understand what sort of things would be important for the concert, so those sort of things as well. That was a newer kind of built venue, so it did have a few different accessibility things built in terms of a hearing loop and accessible bathrooms and things. But I think it's really wonderful being in this venue in a way, because that really helped us to think about what sort of workarounds we could have in a venue that is a little bit older, so maybe didn't have that built in, and I didn't kind of just have to take that for granted. So I think that's been a real, really interesting learning experience as well. So I've really, really learnt a lot and enjoyed it.
Oh, well, yeah, hats off to you to pulling off a pivot. Ria, do you want to chat to us maybe about an example or two of what other people are doing across Australia to make their concerts accessible, and what we're starting to see some more of in this area?
Sure thing. So we have around Australia, we have some great examples of how music organisations are starting to engage with communities of disability, and I consulted Morwenna for my research quite extensively, and it's a lot more apparent for people with disabilities, especially being audience members. So organisations like ACO, that's Australian
Chamber Orchestra. Yep.
Australian Chamber Orchestra, they are putting on relaxed performances for neurodivergent people with visual stories, and they also have audio descriptions in concert. And also relaxed performances are really, really gaining grounds in a lot of music organisations in Australia. We also have shadow interpretation in opera. So Opera Australia has pioneered a lot of that work. So they have, instead of the Auslan interpreter being on one side of the stage, they follow the characters around and they act and they do all the things that their characters do. And in terms of engaging with artists with disability, we do have West Australian Opera engaging with the blind community in Perth for their production of Yolanta, an opera about a blind medieval princess, and they got artist Grace King who played Queen Yolanta in that performance.
Awesome. Thanks, Ria. It's great to hear about what some other people are up to in this space. It is kind of moving and evolving, and I think we're starting to see music organisations do more and more, and perhaps catch up to some of the other art forms and where they're at with including disabled people. Let's come to Nat and Kristin next, but audience, get your thinking caps on because I'm looking at you next. But Nat and Kristin, just wondering, as you're, and I know, disability is newer to the two of you in terms of your lived experience, but just wondered if you had any commentary about your experience interacting with the music industry and how inclusive or not that has been, and anything that you might have come up against or examples of where you've been welcomed with open arms, like today. But yeah, any sort of reflections on where our Australian music industry is at with disability? Maybe you first, Nat.
Yeah. I think some of the barriers I found to the music industry are very similar perhaps to just the issues relating to gender, where it's often you don't really know what gigs you don't get because you're disabled or female. And then there's just, I guess assumptions made about what it might mean to be neurodivergent, perhaps. But I think the funny thing is in the music industry, if we really think about it, probably more professional artists are neurodivergent than not. It's just whether or not they know that they are. And so part of the issue I often have is a bit of kind of gaslighting, where you say, oh, well, I've found out I'm autistic, and I have these, repetitive behaviours, or I have trouble disconnecting from work, or social anxiety. And often the response is, yeah, but everybody feels like that. And I'm like, but do they? Or is that just because you're neurodivergent too, but you don't know it yet? So that's partly sometimes the issue, is that you ask for accommodations, but it sounds like everybody else experiences the same thing, so why should you have extra accommodations, if that makes sense? So that's a really interesting space to be in. And the other issue I found is to do with being an artist of my own original music. It's extremely difficult to have a kind of sick day, or there's no understudy for Nat Bartsch to play Nat Bartsch's music. So if I was doing a tour, for example, and I had a day where I was really overwhelmed, it's not like I can, the whole show would be cancelled. Everybody would have to be refunded. And so there's a lot of pressure to kind of, the show must go on mentality, which is just so toxic and awful. But I actually can't see a practical solution to that when you play your own works, when you're a solo artist. And, if you're like, Madonna, I'm sure that your life on tour is so supported that even if you are feeling a bit sick or a little bit injured or something, there's physios there, and there's all these people that'll help you be as well as you can in order to go on stage. But for someone who's in the classical or jazz scene and in a much, much lower career stage, those types of accommodations are a lot harder. So,
Great reflections, Nat, and some conundrums, I think, for to be solved. And, something that we're sort of, I think, collectively wanting to see happen is just to get really comfortable talking about what people's access requirements are. Some disabled musicians or artists have access riders that really spell out what are the accommodations that they need, and we need to just normalise that with all of the music organisations and the industry, just to be, access requirements are things that people need to do their best work, and we need to set up everyone for success, and different people need different things. So, it's a conversation that we really want to encourage everyone to be having. Kristin, any reflections or thoughts from you on,
first thing I'll say, the industry that I was able to continue working in post-accident has been film, not performance. I'm trying to come back now. And that's, I found them to be really quite supportive in spite of film being an incredibly stressful, deadline-oriented kind of process. And I had an uncanny knack of always lining up a film score and hand surgery. I knew if I had a hand surgery scheduled, I'd get a film score. It's sort of guaranteed. And it filled me with a bit of dread, to be honest. I've got to, even once, if the film got delayed, the surgery got delayed. That's how uncanny it was. And, fortunately, playing rustic viola, because it was a lot more rustic than what it was today for quite a while, because between surgeries, things weren't quite right. I did Backtrack Boys, which is a great Australian documentary about boys and dogs and disadvantaged youth. Well, rustic viola was perfect fit for that one. And then when I for the Warwick Thornton, my index finger and because the sagittal bands were all destroyed, and middle finger were crossed, and I couldn't do anything about it. And a glass of red wine went into the studio, and it just so happened that Warwick Thornton really liked rustic viola. And then when the third major film score I did was a documentary called about women in STEM, Antarctica, and that one kind of actually broke me because it was just such a difficult film anyhow under normal circumstances, and I had just major issues with that. But there were in that one there are lots of cello harmonics, so I will say that everyone was really supportive, and they were supportive of recovery, and the image that you saw, like I actually had a splint on when I'm doing certain scores or just come out of, it's ridiculous. I shouldn't have done a lot of things that I did. But I was afraid. I wanted to keep my finger working, and in the industry, if you stop, that's when it becomes a problem. So I kept going, even though I probably should have stopped. I didn't really talk about it or publicise for a while because I was sort of trying to, and I think it's quite common with orchestral musicians. You got a hand injury or something, you kind of keep it quiet. You don't sort of talk about it much. And it wasn't until I realised that my return to cello wasn't going to happen, and I was going to have to come out as a viola player that that I thought it's time to come out and talk about it for the benefit of any other musicians that go through hand accidents. Because I was looking for stories desperately at the time, and there really aren't that many stories that I could find with, I wanted to know everything, like how long it took them to recover, and when they, that they got back, and I wanted the full gamut. So, I would say that from my experience in the film industry is that they were just really fantastic and so accommodating and so flexible within a very stressful industry.
Thanks, Kristin. And I think we've seen some really great developments in film and disability. Things like a number of our film festivals across the country have disability streams and have a lot of really accessible, a focus on accessibility in terms of what they put on their screens as well. So maybe at a different stage to our music industry, perhaps. Audience, let's invite you in. What questions have you got for the panel? What would you like to know? We've got a little roving mic. And now is your chance to ask them everything you've been dying to know.
Hello. Thank you for today, which was fantastic, and I'm enjoying this conversation so much. My name's Catherine Kemp, and I work for Musica Viva Australia. I was interested to hear a number of you talk about the perfectionism of classical music. And we've recently been working with an artist called Judith Crispin, who began as a sort of avant-garde contemporary musician and is now better known as a poet and visual artist. And she brought to us, if you're a novelist, everybody's actually quite pleased when you write a play or a poem. And in music, this just isn't the case. So I would really love to hear more from you as a panel, how the state of classical or art music in Australia at the moment, how can we loosen it up a bit?
Let's Well, I'll throw the first idea in, which is relaxed performances. I think that'll help loosen us all up a little bit. But who else has ideas around this? It is definitely a theme that's come up for us today, and certainly a theme I think a lot of us have been really cognizant of within the industry. And one of the reasons that there can be that hesitation around identity and disclosure around disability as well. But anyone want to jump in on that one? Yeah.
I will. Because I was classically trained cellist. I have so much respect for the musicians playing at that level. Like it's remarkable. when you've got that former ability and then you lose it because it's to do with muscle memory and all sorts of things, it's a more confronting world. Like, I was pretty afraid to play with such amazing musicians because I'm still struggling to get my fingers down in the right spot according to that level. And I think, I don't know how, I can't really relate to how it comes across for untrained audiences. I just know for myself, I can hear when things are out of tune. And but then the other perspective that I have is, when I hear a musician, doesn't matter what quality they are at, what level they're at, sometimes the heart just comes through so strongly, and the music is beautiful at a level that's beyond the highly trained sort of perspective. I don't quite know how to describe it, but you all know what I'm talking about. And so I think that I would like to see an industry develop, or an audience. I think the audience naturally embrace it, but I'd like to see an industry developed where that was more a part of a measure of the expectation of musicians to enable those of us who maybe are never going to play at that, not even close. Not that I could before, but but that would be nice to be able to have more of a collaborative and experience in that way. And I think that's my perspective. Yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Okay, I might.
Yeah, come on in, Ria.
So in terms of how can we make the music industry a bit more loosen up for artists with disabilities, I think there just need to be a greater engagement with musicians and also composers and performers with disability. And when those kinds of people are part of the environment, so to speak, then we do influence how you would present your music. For instance, how would writing music in terms of what kind of time signatures would be easier to read. I'm not saying that we should all go back to Mozart 4/4/8 bars formula, but there are some things that which are easier for people to read or to consume or to listen to than the composer is not the be all and end all. Like, between them and the audience there are performers. Yeah.
Thanks, Ria. Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Anything else that you'd like to ask our panel? Yes, we've got one up the back.
Hi, thank you so much. Amazing music and amazing speech as well. I wanted to ask, have there been moments when your disabilities stopped made you rest when you didn't want to? Did you feel pressured to continue working? Why? Is that something that we need to talk about in disability as well? Is the balance between rest and work?
I feel like you touched on that a little bit, Nat, earlier, didn't you?
Yeah. What rest? Yeah, there's been many, many times where I've had to perform, but also just generally meet deadlines when I should have been resting. Like, I made a film score when I had COVID, but everybody did the stuff like that. I found for a long time that real tricky intersection between wanting to do the work, because it's like my passion and I'm determined to do it, and trying to listen to my mind and my body and what it needs. And I have often made the wrong call, but I'm kind of my own worst enemy, because I want to perform. So it's almost like sometimes the expectation was my own, other times it was the venues. And I remember there was this one time where I had a family member who had gone missing and I was meant to fly to Sydney to play with my trio for a jazz festival. And so that's got almost nothing to do with my own disabilities, except for the fact that it was extremely distressing. And I remember the promoter was like, no, you've just got to come. I mean, what are you going to do? Your band's going to lose the work and we won't have a trio and everything. So I still flew to Sydney and did that. And I would never do that now. But that's the kind of culture in the industry. And I think COVID, in a way, is maybe shaking it up a little bit. Like, people are a little bit more open to being replaced by other players or postponing a show, and whether that's these days to do with the economics of a gig or whether it's to do with someone having COVID or some other illness or injury. Maybe it's the silver lining of COVID, is we're a little bit more flexible than we used to be. Yeah.
Anyone else want to respond to sort of this idea of rest and when we push ourselves and or not? No? I reckon we've got time for like one more audience question, and then I might ask a final question to wrap us up. Yes, come on in.
Hi, my name's Nicole. Amongst performing, I'm also a teacher at university level and at secondary and primary level. I'd like to extend Catherine's question and hear your thoughts on how we can shake up, change music education at all different levels to be more inclusive, and to think perhaps I've got lots of questions about the pre-professional space at the moment. Over to you. Thank you so much for a really fabulous concert. Amazing stuff. Thank you.
I might jump in just to kick us off on this one while you guys have a little think. But it's something I've really observed working with music organisations and also tertiary institutions is, you know, there can be a lot of blame around lack of accessibility. You know, our orchestras can say, well, we don't have disabled musicians as our members because they're not coming through the conservatoriums, and the conservatoriums will say we don't have disabled students because they're not coming through the high schools. So there can be this kind of chain of kind of shifting the buck, if you like. And so something I try and do as a consultant is work with organisations about where are you at right now, what do you have the power to do, and what can you take responsibility for and change. But yes, there's a whole lot to unpack around music education at a tertiary and secondary and below level as well. But I think I'm personally starting to see some good things shift about, you know, the conservatorium, for example, doing more around embedding conversations of accessibility into their courses. I think at universities generally, we are starting to have the disability conversation more broadly than just I talk to the disability services person over here about that, but starting to talk with teachers about what that looks like. I did some good PD with the con teachers last year, I think. So, but I think just more conversation and more raising awareness within institutions and education facilities is good. Education-wise, you know, we still call it special education. It's 2022, and like, what is that? So, you know, we're still kind of stuck in the olden days a little bit. But yeah, you guys are much more connected to music, or some of you are much more connected to music education than I am. So yeah, any thoughts from our panel?
I might jump into my mat. Yeah, one of the most remembered experience that I had in high school was I failed a music exam because I couldn't adequately describe how to answer the question to the scribe. And even though it didn't happen in Australia, it was such a, it was such a traumatic experience, I would say, because I then went on to discover as much as I could about print scores, and then about my own Braille music scores and how to transcribe from one to the other. So accommodation is definitely very important, and also having the conversations like, so how are you finding this? Like, can you understand the kind of things that we're trying to teach you? And it would be like when when I finished my high school in Australia, having a music teacher who was interested in learning about how Braille music works, for instance, it made such a difference. I never had that before. And yeah, I am a musician today, partly and on a huge part because of her.
I think that sort of huge influence, as many of you musicians in the audience would know, but that huge influence and impact that our music teachers on an individual level have with people, and the opportunities that they can sort of follow is so important, isn't it? So yeah, our music teachers that have an open mind and are open to things looking different and people doing things differently is really important, isn't it?
I just have one little thing to add, which is I actually barely passed my AMEB exams. I stopped at grade 6. I did pretty well at solo performance VCE, and then the whole way through my tertiary course I basically have never been able to practice repertoire or jazz standards. In fact, I don't even know how I figured out how to improvise the way I do at the piano, but somehow I did. And for me, music composition and performing my own works and creating my sound world out of that was the only way that I could be a professional musician. Because I wouldn't have ever been a concerto pianist, and I couldn't play, jazz. I had no interest in playing jazz standards, doing that pathway that you might do at the Sydney Con, for example. So I just happened to be in the music course that encouraged composition from the second year onwards, and now I'm a composer. So I just think it's worth being notable, because I think within those music education structures there's probably a whole cohort of neurodivergent students that have aptitude to create music like I'm doing, but on paper it's not going to look like the achievements that are there necessarily. I mean, I still got into VCA playing, there must have been something that they noticed, but there's students that might not even finish their degree because they didn't get around to practicing or writing tunes for their recital, or, there's a whole bunch of people out there that might be missing the opportunity to make great music because of the kind of expectations and structure. Yeah.
Thanks, Nat. Any final audience questions? Yes. Yeah.
Ria, you also mentioned to me how the experience of having to do sight reading in your exam, how kind of discriminatory that is.
So I think the point of sight reading is you need to work out that a musician can read the music quickly, they won't take too long to figure it out. So what are other ways? If sometimes I had to transcribe my own sight reading exercises. So is that the point? How can I? What are the other ways that you can figure that part about a musician's ability out by not plonking a piece of sheet music in front of them, which they might or might not be able to pick up?
That is kind of a hilarious story about translating your own sight reading. It's amazing. There'd be AMEB examiners reeling, hearing that. Any final audience questions? Otherwise, I'll kind of ask a final wrap-up question, but do jump in if you've got anything. Yes, Claire.
I don't know if we made much of a big deal about this today, but I was super impressed by the amount of world premieres that we had today and first performances. It's the first time Ria's ever sung that piece with us, which was amazing. And George's piece was a world premiere? Not a world premiere. But by you.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to know, Kristin, was that the first time that you'd performed that piece publicly?
It's the words at the beginning and the images that's the first time. The piece I played, if you count Malakuta.
Yeah, totally count Malakuta.
My community has been incredibly supportive, and I've had a few performance opportunities, and that piece has been played there. But it's the first time, the first proper performance of a piece, I guess.
Well, I just wanted to congratulate you in that case, because I've never met you before, and probably because you live in Malakuta, and I felt like it was so well honed and beautifully in tune, and the way your music was so sort of integral to the video and vice versa. I found it very striking and beautiful. So congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Pretty great stuff to be in the audience for a bunch of world premieres. So very, very lucky this afternoon. To wrap up, I want to ask you, I'm going to give you a choose your own adventure final question, and we've got a choice of two. Tell me something great that you love about being a deaf or disabled musician, or something great about deaf or disabled musicians, or an action that you'd like to see Australian music organisations to take to be more inclusive of us. So whatever you feel like responding to. Let's come over this way, and Ria, do you want to be first cab off the rank?
Can I go next?
Yes. Who's got something for me?
I've got something.
Yay.
I just think we should be really, the music industry really should be programming more diverse artists. That's something that really should be happening. And I suppose just in terms of accessibility, I think things have shifted a lot. But also just ensuring accessibility to the stage, not just to the audience, I think is really important as well. So that's a couple of things that could be really good to do.
As an access consultant, I have a lot of conversations with organisations about audiences, and sometimes the conversation about artists is not always something that's always occurred to every arts organisation. So yes, great point, Georgia. Ria, are you warmed up now?
Yes. Could you please repeat the second question?
What's an action you'd like to give to Australian music organisations to do to include us better?
I think I'm just going to keep it simple. Maybe search artists with disability or composers with disability, and Dr. Google will come up with a bunch of them that they can program.
So good. So good. And I was just saying to Nat before, I've also got a little black book if anyone needs one of amazing deaf and disabled musicians. So yes, because it can be, they're on Google, absolutely, but it can be difficult to find because we don't always give our musicians an opportunity to talk about their identity and who they are. So thanks, Ria. Kristin.
Okay. It's all pretty new to me as well, but what I felt like I needed when the hand accident, so I'll just talk from a personal perspective. When the hand accident happened, what I needed was more stories and more artists out there doing it, because that would have, and like there probably are, but they're probably quiet, as other people have mentioned. So I wanted to have that as that I could maybe even reach out to. That would have been of huge benefit in my process. And I think the other thing is more funding for Backstage music, because because they've actually taken the initiative, and it's quite remarkable. So I think just, it's happening, and we're all a part of it, and how awesome is that? So,
on the topic of funding, actually, I actually wanted to give a shout out to my state government funding, arts funding body, Creative Victoria.
Yeah, they are enviable.
I don't know what's happening in New South Wales, so I don't mean to do the Melbourne-Sydney thing. This isn't a Melbourne-Sydney competition thing, but I want to acknowledge them because during COVID, they started doing a thing where when you apply for a grant, when you apply for any grant, you can always include access costs, right? But with the Creative Victoria grants, the access costs are actually offered on top of the amount of money. So it means if you need to spend $2,000 paying for access costs for your project, that doesn't mean that the amount of money you get to receive for the project is reduced in order for that to happen. It's actually added on top. And it's such a simple gesture, and it's not necessarily a huge amount of money either. But so, for example, I got a grant to start developing my neurodivergent lullaby project, and I think the COVID grants are $5,000, and then another $2,000 on top, which is helping me pay for like physio for chronic pain and like support workers to help me organise my materials when I'm working on this stuff, like all sorts of stuff. And it was just on top. And I just think it was almost moving to read that in the fine print, that like my project isn't going to be disadvantaged in order to have my access needs met. So hopefully Australia Council and everywhere else might take that on board too.
Fingers crossed. Yes. Oh, yeah. How did you get a microphone? I didn't know how that happened. Cool. Yeah. Look, I think we better wrap up. But thank you. Amazing panel, amazing musicians today. Lamorna and Georgia for putting this together and making this happen. You guys for being with us. May this not be the last concert of incredible disabled talent that you see. So please join me in thanking our incredible musicians and panel.
And thank you. Yes. Thank you.